Mike, I think you can start.
Oh, okay. Hi, everybody. I think we've had just started admitting people from the waiting room, so I hope you're comfortable in there. And we will get this started in just a minute. Maybe I'll give it one more minute for people to come in. Just so you know, I'm Mike English, and I work at Turn the Page KC in Kansas City. We have both sides of the state represented here. So if you look through the list of participants here on the side, you will see people from Kansas City and from St. Louis. And this is a good topic today because it affects all of us in Missouri. Okay. Okay, so with that, I will get us started here. Again, I'm Mike English, and I also want to introduce Lisa Greening. Lisa, folks in St. Louis know Lisa. She is started Turn the Page St. Louis, Turn the Page at STL. And this is the first time we've kind of done a joint convening like this. It's too bad we couldn't have done it in person, but we would have liked to do that. In fact, we are both part of a national campaign called the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has been working for probably about 8 or 10 years nationally, trying to promote the importance of reading by grade level at the end of 3rd grade. And one of the things that they do is they try to get organizations like ours started across the country. And in fact, that's how we got started in Kansas City back in 2013. Our mayor, Sly James, met Ralph Smith, who was with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading at a U.S. Mayor's Conference, and was really, I guess, convinced that a great role that America could have was to get a initiative started like this to raise awareness about the importance of reading by grade level at 3rd grade, but also to really convene and align a lot of different partners in the community to work towards that shared goal. So this Campaign for Grade Level Reading, they try to host a conference each year, and I think they've been doing it for 5 or 6 years. And they had one scheduled for this week, and it was going to be in Washington, D.C. And then they called it off, obviously, oh gosh, a few months ago. And then instead, what they've done is to host a series of webinars this week on topics ranging from the science of reading to ways United Ways can be effective in this work. Oh, here's the list right here. Thank you, Lisa. And so they organized these webinars, but then they also encouraged organizations like ours across the country to host our own webinars that are more, maybe more relevant to our states and our communities. And so Lisa and I got together and decided to host a few in Missouri that we thought would be really appropriate and time sensitive. We actually had the first one last Thursday, which was focused on school attendance. And so we had a webinar where we worked with United Way and School Smart KC in Kansas City to bring in, or to have Hetty Chang speak about attendance and how to measure attendance in a distance learning environment. And then this morning we had one on federal child care relief. So Kids Win Missouri talked about advocating for increased funding for childcare, which obviously is actually very relevant to this conversation as well. So we feel like this is a great opportunity for us in Missouri to kind of come together and talk about our agenda to elevate learning loss recovery as an urgent priority for the state of Missouri. So with that, we'll get to some housekeeping rules, or not rules, details. Yeah, some details. So first of all, if we'd love for you to say hi in the chat and just introduce yourself so we know who all is on the call, and you guys can mention your organization. And then second, this Zoom call is being recorded. So we're gonna, if you have colleagues that weren't able to make it, we'll have a link for this after the meeting that they can listen to. And then next, we have everybody muted throughout the presentation. But to work on, to get questions, what we like to do is ask you to put questions in the chat box, and then Lisa will be keeping an eye on those. And then when we get to the Q&A portion, she can kind of, if there's tons of questions, she can kind of group them and ask them. And then if we have time, we'll just open it up to everybody to get off mute and have a conversation. And then finally, just we hope you enjoy this, and hopefully that Erin's work with Campfire will inspire you at other after-school programs here and in St. Louis. So with that, I'm going to give a little context here for why we thought this topic would be relevant. So if we could get to, there we go, the next slide there, Lisa. So at the end of the school year closed back in March, and then this distance learning started in schools all over the country. And as COVID progressed, the state of Missouri started to plan on reopening at the end of May. And when that happened, we were very concerned to turn the page about what was that going to mean for parents, because we had parents who were not able to go, that had kids at home. They were trying to, they were trying to coach them on their learning, their distance learning. But summer was approaching, and a lot of parents were saying, we're going to be asked to go back to work, and we have really no idea what we're going to do with our kids, because childcare programs, many of them were closed, some of them were open, but only for children of essential workers. And so we really raised an alarm here in Kansas City about reopening and the impact that was going to have on parents and families. And we were trying our best to try to work with summer school providers to expand and offer more in-person summer learning programming. And so because of that, we're able to expand some and serve more kids. But that experience really, Erin Boline, who I'll introduce in a little bit, about a month later, said we're going to have a similar issue in the fall when if kids cannot go back to school, and if school is virtual, we're going to have an issue with childcare again, and perhaps the after-school sector can provide essentially some extended programming to care for kids during the school day when they can't be in school. So we've had a series of discussions here in Kansas City, and as we've been doing that, we've been keeping an eye on what school districts and charters plan to do this fall. It seems that most of our schools school will resume on August 24th. And it seems that all of the districts so far that have announced their reopening plans are providing a parent choice to go 100% virtual. So some of our districts that are planning to have in-person school have also said, as a parent, if you're not comfortable with that, we will also have virtual distance learning as an option. Making things more complicated, though, are the schools that have already come out with plans or are thinking about plans to reopen with a hybrid version where perhaps basically all hybrid plans have dividing the student body into two halves, and the whole idea is that you'll have social distancing in the school building by having less kids there. But then, so these different options might be half days for, morning for half the kids, afternoon for the other half, or alternating days. And so many of our schools have come out with the idea that they'll have Mondays and Wednesdays for Group A, Tuesdays and Thursdays for Group B. And then other schools want to come back with alternating weeks, even though in Missouri, the DESE guidance, it seems like that's not supposed to be an option at this point, but I know that some schools would like to do that. So have Group A go the first week, Group B go the next week. So if you could go to the next slide, Lisa. These four scenarios that I have here, this is what people like Aaron are trying to work on right now is, first of all, scenario A, which maybe would be the least disruptive, where school resumes in person and there's no change to after school programming. Scenario 2 is school resumes in person, but LEAs restrict access to buildings. And so perhaps kids can go to school during the school day, but where they would used to have after school programming in that building, perhaps that wouldn't be an option. Scenario 3, school is all virtual and there's a huge expanded need for childcare. And then finally, the fourth one is that hybrid version I mentioned before. So next slide, please. So these are some of the challenges that after school programs will obviously face. First, space. Social distancing it requires more space. Reduced enrollment, staff health and safety, increased costs for equipment and sanitation equipment, and then finally, possibly spending more of the school day with the out-of-school time providers. And unfortunately, those providers don't receive that state average daily attendance funding. Okay, next slide. So I kind of already talked about this, but these are some of the more details on what those hybrid models might look like with Group A and Group B. And what I want to point out here is that on those off days, if kids in Group A are not in school that day and can't be at home because their parents are working, parents need to find a place where not only their kids can get childcare, but that's conducive to learning, because they'll still be expected to distance learn. And so that might mean having access to Wi-Fi and devices. Next slide. So at this point, I want to bring in Erin. And so Erin Beline is the Executive Director of Campfire Heartland. And I actually know Erin from her previous role, where she worked for several years as a program officer with the Corporation for National Community Service, CNCS, which administers the AmeriCorps program. And I worked specifically with Erin on the VISTA program. And but Erin's been in the nonprofit sector for her whole career and is now at Campfire. And I'd like, Erin, if you could you just explain to everybody what Campfire is and what all of your services include?
Sure, thanks, Mike. So Campfire Heartland is a part of a national affiliate, Campfire. We are in Kansas City. We provide after-school programming, in-school programming, summer camp, and club programming. All of our curriculum revolves around social emotional learning, and so we work with kids mainly K through 8, and focus on we focus on that social emotional learning piece in all of our programs.
Okay, thanks, Erin. And then so on our next slide, what I'm going to start walking everybody through with Erin is her plan for after school this fall. So Erin came to me about, like I said, about a month ago and said, we as a city need to start thinking about how to provide care to kids on those off days. And so she started putting together a plan about what that would mean for Campfire. So Erin, could you go through this first slide here, outlining kind of the overall plan?
Sure. So most of you probably know, back in May, the Missouri School Board Association came out with recommendations about what the school year could look like and proposed this A-B model where kids would be in the building part-time, but at home part of the time. When I saw that, my first response was, there is no way that's going to happen. And then I thought about it and realized, so far, everything I thought there's no way that could happen is exactly what's happening with COVID. We have a partnership with Parks and Recreation of Kansas City to do our after-school programming. And so I immediately called them and I said, hey, if kids are out of the building half the time, I'm in to help figure this out. Are you? And their response was absolutely. So I started to put together a plan, because this was in partnership. I kind of had to figure out what Heartland was going to do and what Parks and Rec was going to do. And so actually the course of these slides are portions of that plan that we've put together. So here you see the purpose, and kind of what we're thinking is that kids are going to need a space during the school day that's both physically safe and emotionally safe. And partly because parents need to go back to work. And so we need kids not to be home alone. There's lots of young kids where this is definitely a potential. And so we're working to create that space where kids can go on those days. In addition, they're going to need academic support on those off days. If school's only happening half the time, then the other part of school is going to happen wherever those kids are. So we've been working on a plan to streamline that academic support. And then finally, our big thing is social emotional learning for kids. And I think this is incredibly important right now as kids have had to readjust to life in a pandemic, whether it's that they've been socially distanced from people and probably craving some human interaction, or been spending a lot of time online, and we know bullying happens online. So we're really trying to prepare for what kids' social emotional needs are going to be in this upcoming school year.
And so the schedule is so hard to predict because we still don't know all of the school schedules for the fall, but you've started to put together alternative schedules of what your out of school time could look like. So do you mind walking us through that on the next slide?
Yeah. Here we go. So we do after school, when we pivot to out of school this school year, as most of you can guess, it's probably logistically pretty complicated because you have to figure out how many kids you can fit in a building, how you can socially distance them. So once I started to put the plan on paper, honestly, the logistics just kept getting more logistical. I kept going down rabbit holes, but it was good because once I got that plan on paper, I could really visualize what the year would look like. For us, we are in 4 parks and rec centers, which you can see at the bottom of the slide. So Tonia Gary, Garrison, Greg Cleiss, and Westport. Each site, we believe, can hold what I'm calling 3 pods. So it would be 9 kids and 1 adult per pod. And that is based on current guidelines from local health department, CDC, trying to keep up to date with all of the guidelines as they come out. But at the time that I wrote it, that was what made the most sense. So in theory, we could get 27 kids and 3 leaders in each site. But of course, you can't have out of school and after school together. So in this example here, we would make, for example, the Tonia Gary site and the Garrison Community Center an out of school site. And so we would start around 8 in the morning and run our academic program until 4. And then we would do like our club programming and whatnot and offer that until 6 p.m. So really that out of school day would go from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And that would happen at Tony and Garrison. Now the kids who are in the school building are still going to need after school care. Parents aren't necessarily going to be able to magically pick their kids up yet right after school. So we would designate Greg, Cleiss, and Westport as after school sites. So when kids leave the school building, then they would come over and we would be able to hold, again, 3 pods per site. It got a little tricky because we couldn't take the after school kids to the Tonia Gary site after school because now we would double the number of kids in that building. So that wouldn't work. Part of the challenge is it really depends on how the schools land on their A-B schedule. Every other week makes it really easy. We've heard one school talk about going to school. Group A would be Monday, Tuesday. Group B would be Wednesday, Thursday, and everybody would be off Friday. So some of those are less complicated. Half days become incredibly complicated, to figure out where kids would go for after school. But this is kind of what we looked at to be able to designate both our out of school and our after school programming and keep all the kids distanced and safe.
Okay, and then so for the out of school time day, I think on this next slide, you have your daily schedule here. So could you kind of walk us through what that would look like?
Sure. So when the School Board Association came out with their recommendations, these are kind of the patterns that were introduced originally. So alternative weeks look, week 1, Group A would go to school in the building every day of the week, and Group B would be with us, and then week 2, it would be vice versa. Half days, kids would be at school in the morning and then come to us afterwards. Group B would be in schools in the afternoon, so we would have them in the morning. And then alternative days, Monday we have Group A, Tuesday we have Group B, Wednesday we have Group A. It goes back and forth. In the more expansive version of this, which I'm happy to share with any of you, it spells out how the after school works with these alternative schedules, as well as how the out of school program works with these AB schedules. And then you see our daily schedule here. This is kind of a sample of what we're looking at. So for those of you who are licensed by childcare, you know that we have to feed the kids every 4 hours. And so, so there would be breakfast, and then we plan on kind of rotating 3 main chunks of the day. So one would be the social emotional learning, one would be some free time, and one would be time to do their academics and homework. Then we would eat and then do the same 3 things again. I'm trying to think of how you can, if you're going to have kids there all day, how do you keep them interested and how do you keep things moving? And so we are looking at having kind of 3 distinct kinds of programs or chunks of activities over the course of the day. We would probably end that around 4 o'clock and then move into after school types of programming, which would be a little bit more club, like a chess club or a gardening club, or, you know, something that's a little bit different. Again, trying to break up the kids' day and make it a little less redundant, as we have them, you know, for up to 11 hours a day.
And so just like at schools, Erin, you're going to have to take all kinds of COVID-19 precautions, which I know you've thought through. Could you run through those on the next slide?
Yeah. So these are the precautions that I put in this initial proposal that I put together. What was really helpful for us is that we run a summer day camp, and we are ACA, or American Camp Association accredited. During the summer, as the world was trying to figure out how to run summer camp, ACA was working with the CDC to come up with guidelines. If you followed it over the summer, they put together some guidelines. For political reasons, it didn't quite make it out into the world, but it was leaked. So you can find the document. Meanwhile, ACA was doing town halls, virtual town halls, and I went on many of them, and they walked programs through how they believed camp could be the safest. And so I used, you know, kind of some of their recommendations along with local health departments, CDC, all of those guidelines to think through how we avoid contamination or exposure. What I want to be really thoughtful about is if schools are working really hard to set up systems to minimize exposure, I want to make sure that we're not creating the risks, that we're as streamlined and as precautious as the schools are, because otherwise there's no point in the schools doing all these precautions if we're just going to blow it on our end. So like I said, we're going to keep kids in groups of 9 with 1 leader. So we'll have pods of 10. And we know that we can do those at the community centers that we're at. We know that we can get 3 and keep them distanced. We want to try to keep them as streamlined as we can to class assignments. So I mean, in a perfect world, like all of Mrs. Smith kids would be in our pod A, and all of, you know, Mr. Boleyn's kids would be in pod B. If we can't do it to that granular level, we would try to do it so like all first graders are in one pod, all second graders. We'll work with the schools and try to come up with the best way to minimize exposure. We try to think through supplies to make sure kids each have their own set of supplies. Kids can store their personal items where they're not touching. I even went and toured the sites earlier this week just to think through where we're going to put the kids' stuff and where we're going to store the supplies. And the community centers aren't huge, but there's space to be able to do that. So we'll be able to pull that off. We've talked about, you know, cleaning. We've talked about how we'll check in to do like a touchless check in, check out system, taking kids' temperatures, quarantining kids who do have a temperature if they come into after school with a temperature. So, you know, kind of all of those pieces. How do we keep kids' stuff separated? How do we keep kids in the smallest pods as possible? And how do we streamline streamlined that with the schools to make sure that we're not creating more risk than the schools are. We're at least the risk level is equal. That's the goal.
Yeah, and so in normal times, you're not doing all of this stuff, and you're also not providing full day care. And so whenever your budget year started, you probably hadn't budgeted for this level of intensity. So, so Erin was kind enough to share her budget on what this additional cost would be, and I thought it would be interesting to go through some of that just so you can see how much of an additional expense this is going to be. And one thing I'll just note too is that schools get average daily attendance funding for students when they are in the building, and then also when they are when they are getting provided distance learning. And so there's this additional cost of helping keep kids in the building, but also facilitating their learning that has to take place. And we're trying to figure out where the heck that money is going to come from. And so what Erin has been doing is trying to put together a group of after-school providers that are willing to do this. And maybe, Erin, you could talk about who they are, and then find revenue sources from COVID relief funds through charitable contributions, but then also even from, we're working on some public funding sources as well. So Erin, if you're willing to go through this budget, that would be great. And then also if you could talk a little bit about some of the other after school time providers you're working with.
Yeah. So I tried to figure out how much this was going to cost per kid, because I needed to call some funders and ask for a whole lot of money. And I knew that very early on. So what you're going to see, and this is pretty specific to Campfire Heartland, and what we would need, and this is, I think this came out to serve about 108 kids is what this budget shows. So on-site directors would need to be on site full-time. So most of you who are experienced with childcare licensing knows that you've got to have a site director who's got a minimum level of education credits, and they have to pass a whole bunch of qualifications. So I would need to pull 2 of those on, and I would personally like to have a program director who really just runs out of school, because this is a little bit new for us. So I built that into the budget. Benefits you'll see there. Then I tried to break down who would teach the kids, or I don't know if teach is the right word, because we're not going to be school, but we're going to be this hybrid space in between childcare and education. What I did was looked at bringing people on part-time for different chunks of the day. So have a person in the morning, have a person in the afternoon, have somebody who runs after school. So I think I realized I was probably going to have to hire about 46 people to run this program. I added an overhead expense. You'll see supplies for after school and supplies for out of school at about 108, 150, I think it was $100 and $150 for the course of the year. And then those of you, again, who do childcare licensing know that there's pretty stringent background checks that we need to do for all of our staff. So I broke all of that down because we have to do drug testing and fingerprints and all of those pieces. So I came out to a grand total of about $588,243. I played with the budget again yesterday, and I actually came up with a new number, which is closer to $600,000 for 100 kids. But that puts us at an average of about $6,000 per kid for the course of the year. I reached out to Mike and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking will be the cost per kid. Have you heard from anybody else? Has anybody else put a budget together like this? So as I've reached out to other providers, I think we all feel like $6,000 is about right, give or take, but that feels pretty comfortable for all of us. So once I came up with that, I called the first 2 people I called was Mike English, and then I called the Kauffman Foundation here in Kansas City. I realized this was going to take a big chunk of money, and I was going to need to make a pretty big ask. And so I wanted to give my program officer a heads up that I think we're going to have a really big issue come fall, and I've got a plan, and I'm going to need to make a really big ask. What do you need me to do? What kind of prep work do I need to do? And his response was, get this plan on paper, let us see it, We have to go back and look at what we can do. His response, and I have talked to many funders in the Kansas City area at this point, everybody's response is, oh my gosh, this is huge. This is something that we're going to need to do something about. The impact is going to be enormous come fall. Most of them have designated out funds for the course of the year. They know where their money's going, and there's some money left in the budget. Not a huge amount, but there's some. So what I ask is, would they be willing to collaboratively work together to put some money together and fund this project? And I also ask if they would be responsive, and maybe actually I think Jim really kind of suggested, if there was a way to make it a collaborative effort with the other programs in Kansas City, that would be really helpful. And so we worked together. Mike pulled some other after school programs together, and we all got on a phone call and talked about what we can do and how this works. So we have confirmed the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Kansas City, the Y of Greater Kansas City, Upper Room, and us have decided we are all going to work together and figure this out. Because I mean, you guys have, you see a big chunk of the plan. It's big, and there's a lot of logistics. It's expensive, but we also know that they need a safe place to be during the school year. We know that parents are going to have to make a tough decision between whether or not they can work and stay home. We know that this impacts economy. We know this impacts childcare. We know this impacts education. And so honestly, this has not been a hard sell at all to funders, at all. It's like the easiest time I've ever had calling funders, and that's it's a change.
So Erin, you mentioned a little bit of the licensing. So before we get to the questions, just one more from me, which is you guys are not licensed as a childcare facility, and so what are the state regulations that are preventing this from happening that you need to overcome?
Yeah. So Campfire Heartland is in the process of getting our sites licensed by the DHSS. What we realized quickly is space is a huge challenge. And if we could get into spaces that are available, we could expand programming considerably. Parks and Rec has actually 9 buildings that they could hold out of school programming with, but that means all 9 have to get licensed. We know that there's convention spaces and places of worship and meeting rooms. There's tons of space out there that's not being used, but because the child care licensing regulations around buildings are so stringent, we can't just go into those spaces. And it would take probably some pretty expensive upgrades for a lot of those spaces to get up to code. But schools are not actually held to the same level of building requirements as after school programs are. After school programs are held to that level because it's childcare, and childcare, they deal with much younger kids. All that said, I called the Missouri After School Board, the Missouri After School Network, and talked to their legislative team, and they have been incredibly responsive. As of today, they have sent a letter to the governor asking him to waive those childcare requirements as an emergency response to COVID, which will allow after-school programs to build out-of-school programmings into new spaces throughout their communities. So we're asking him to make an executive order and just clear that. So for those of you who are in summer programs, we would essentially be allowed to do the same things we can do in the summer. Just make the summer requirements the same for the school year. If he passes that, that lifts a lot of burdens in expanding this programming pretty quickly.
Yeah, and Erin, if it's okay, I think I can attach a file to the chat box. Is that okay if I put that in there? The one you just sent me? Okay.
Yep.
I will do that.
Of the email, and then the kind of the detail of the legislations in that attachment.
Okay. Okay, great.
And I know there's some in St. Louis who signed up to that letter as well. I don't know if any of you all are on this call, but there were 8 direct service providers who signed on to that letter to the governor.
You remember which ones, Erin?
I can find it really quick.
And so, Lisa, at this point, if there are questions that folks have, maybe we could get to those. I think the formal presentation's over.
Yes, so I encourage everyone to put their questions in the chat box, or you can raise your hand, unmute. It's a nice group here, and you can just directly ask them. But Bridget here has a question from United for Children here in St. Louis. She wrote, some of the programs here in St. Louis have offered a virtual after-school space. Wondering if any other areas have tried that and if it's successful. I guess that would be to Aaron or Mike.
I mean, I'll say that's not something that we've done some virtual programming, but not in an after-school format.
Because the children need to be, we're looking at very young children and their needs, you know, to be taken care of without parents at home is your primary, and the social emotional piece.
The idea is that if we can get kids safely into our care during the school day, it takes the burden off families so that they don't have to figure out if they are going to work or if they're going to stay home with their kid.
Right.
Because I think as a parent myself and an after school program organization, this really hits home for me. I have to make the same decision. What am I going to do with my kid this school year? So I realize I'm not the only one having to make this tough call.
Yeah, and I'll mention too, this was kind of an issue in the summer space where after summer school providers, there were some summer school providers in Kansas City that that went virtual, and at the same time the districts were providing virtual summer school, and so there became a bit of a competition for virtual students. And at that point, that was a very hard time. So it was a very tough to offer in-person summer school. But of those that did do that, I believe that most this fall are not planning to provide virtual after school, at least the big ones that we work with, but are really trying to work on in-person after school care or extended learning care.
Another question, $6,000 per child, is that for an entire year?
Yeah.
Is that the budget's based on? So it's September to May, I guess?
Yeah. And you'll see in that budget that I made a mistake on how many weeks were in the school year. And so I corrected that yesterday and it jumped up to closer to right at 600,000.
Got it.
So a little less overhead, a little more in salary.
That is great. From Carrie Collins, NSC, I assume you mean Normandy School Collaborative here in St. Louis. Jump in, Carrie, if I'm not saying that correctly. Is a school district here in St. Louis is planning a September 8th start with 100% in person. No hybrid option at this time, but keeping an eye on things in case virtual instruction needs to be implemented at a moment's notice. Are there other districts that are talking about 100% in person in other parts of the state or in St. Louis?
I haven't seen anything go 100% without a virtual option in Kansas City. Have you, Mike?
No, I think there have been many districts are going 100% virtual with a distance learning option. I think that the North Kansas City School District, they are having a distance learning option, but it was one of these, the communication seemed to be, if you would prefer in person, please contact us or contact the principal to set that up. But so far I haven't seen any that aren't making that an option. And one other thing too is that, you know, another issue for school districts is that if they don't at least offer that virtual option, the Missouri, I can't remember what it's called now. I think it used to be the Missouri Virtual Instruction Program, but there is a state agency that provides virtual instruction. And so parents could choose to send their kids to that, and then the school district would lose that ADA funding. So I think it's in their interest to at least make that an option.
Understand. What are,
Hi, this is Carrie. Can you give that information again so I could write it down to share with our superintendent maybe?
Oh,
About
yeah.
the virtual.
Yes. And as we're talking, I will look it up. Does anybody know what it's called now? It used to be MOVIP, the Missouri Virtual Instruction Program. I'll look it up. The one of our school districts told me that they actually had seen this MOCAP. MOCAP is what it's called. That they've seen MOCAP actually doing some advertising, trying to get more student enrollment across the state. And so I will put that, I'll put the MOCAP website into the chat box here.
thank you, Mike. I think an issue here in St. Louis, and please feel free to jump in, anyone, is that much like Normandy School District, St. Louis Public Schools is also, they're looking at 100% in person because the majority of the students do not have access to broadband internet service. It's not just that they may or may not have computers or laptops or Chromebooks. That's not even the issue. It's just simply they don't have access. Almost 50% of those students do not. So I think that that's what a lot of our districts are struggling with. So from Royce here, how would you handle hiring staff? This is his question.
So that's a good question. We have posted our positions online now. And so I will start interviewing and then hire once everything's settled. At least I've interviewed and I can just call them up and offer positions. The other thing is the collaborative has agreed to approach colleges and universities together to see if there's space for internships or student teachers. We would love to take some students to help out. And so instead of all of us kind of calling the same universities together, we're gonna streamline that process. So one advantage to the collaborative. So yeah, there's a lot to ramp up staffing wise for sure. I was gonna say, to address some of that internet issues, that's part of one of the advantages of being able to bring kids into our space is that we'll have that internet access for kids. If I know here, a lot of schools passed out Chromebooks and computers and whatnot back in March. So if the schools, for us, because we work with a lot of charter schools, if those kids still have their computer, we have the internet access for them in their location. It's not to say we can't go write for grants and get some more laptops, computers, pads for kids. So that is, I think that's one of the reasons that this out of school programming is really, it's going to be important.
Right. Kansas City is ahead of St. Louis in several arenas. And one of that is 8 years ago, creating a commission to deal with making sure that all Kansas Cityans had connectivity. And we did not have that in St. Louis and are just starting to form something like that. So the next question, how many students totally would you be able to serve in this collaborative?
We think it'll be close to 1,000 kids with what we have now. So with the space that we have available, with the way we think we can staff up, we expect this to be a 2-phase project. So phase 1 is what we know we have. And then assuming this legislation gets passed or Governor Parsons signs this executive order and loosens up the requirement for space, then we'll be able to expand programming. But it also allows us to figure out what we're doing, let everyone make their decisions. We can figure out what we're doing, start with what we know we have, and then once we have some more answers, potentially expand out. I also wouldn't be surprised if, we start with one plan in October, November, we have a completely different plan based on, changes with the virus, if we all get shut down and we all go home. So we're trying to remain nimble in case there's changes 2-3 months down the road and we need to rethink our phase 2.
Does anyone on this call know, not to keep bringing it back to St. Louis, but I think we're quite envious of your work, there's a collaborative here of those 7 or 8 out of school groups. I know you were going to look at it, Erin.
Yeah. So the St. Louis groups that signed on are United for Children, Unleashing Potential, Association Child Care Services, Gateway Region, the Y, and School Age Initiative Arches.
Arches is Link in St. Louis.
Okay.
And we have somebody on the call. I keep calling her out. I did this morning. Oh, somebody here with United for Children. So that's wonderful. So it's those 4.
Those 4 from St. Louis. Yep. And then here, like I said, it's Campfire, Boys and Girls Club, the Y, and Upper Room, who, those all of our names on this letter, along with the Missouri After School Network. And I think we all know if you do after school, if they can loosen some of those regulations, like that's, I don't think any of us will be sad about that.
No. She's going to kill me again, but Bridget, if you're around, I know you're on this call. Bridget's with United for Children here in St. Louis. Are you, just to get a sense, do you know if United for Children is working with the Y and with UP and with Arches to create this type of school programming and after school programming?
I can't answer that completely. I'm not really sure where we stand. Most of our after school programming that we do actually is in partnership with Arches. And so we are looking at different possibilities for the fall. I know it's going to be dependent on, obviously what the schools decide. But there is some conversation, and I know we work with Mason in collaboration. I don't sit at those tables, so I'm not sure what the conversation has been, but that's something I can definitely find out and share with you guys.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm more than happy to share this complete plan with all of you. I mean, if you're interested in trying to kind of create a collaborative that will address this, if it happens. I mean, it sounds like a lot of your schools are looking at going 100% in person, but I think having a plan in place in case that changes, because I mean, things are just changing so fast.
Exactly.
And honestly, when I put this plan together, it was if this happens, I have a plan, so I'm not scrambling at the last minute. And as it turns out, as you know, for us, half of our kids are in charter schools, and charter schools are making their own individual decision, and we know we're going to be doing out of school. We know that's coming. So I'm grateful that, at least I had a map on paper, and it's been helpful, I think, across the board. So I'm happy to send that to you all, and you can run with it as needed. I think just to have some of that foundational logistics stuff just figured out, you can just move forward.
Yeah, thank you. That would be helpful. I know that some of what you shared initially, I had mentioned, I've heard those thought processes, but what I like about your plan is that it's already down on paper, and it would be nice to have it all streamlined like that. So that would be helpful.
Well, yeah, I will have, yeah. It's also a document that I've shared with funders. So as you're trying to figure out how to fund this, I've gotten really good feedback from funders when I've handed this document over. They feel like, okay, you've actually thought about it. You have a plan. You know who's coming on board. This is very fundable. So yeah, spread it, share it with anyone.
Amazing, Erin. We have just a few more questions. Getting the kids the transportation.
Mm-hmm. Very good question.
How will the students be getting to your centers?
So because we mainly work with charter schools and they all have different transportation systems, just kind of depends. If the school does not have a bus contract, then we will stick with that. Parents are used to dropping their kids off at school, so they'll drop them off with us. That's our plan. For the schools that do have a bus system, we have asked them to include our locations in that route and that they would take on the cost of that. But it works okay theoretically because they would be picking and dropping off those kids
Yeah.
anyway. So it might be a little bit of an extra cost for them, but that we've asked them to contribute by owning that transportation piece.
I'm wondering, can they put as many students also on buses?
Yeah.
That they have been able, and that's a whole nother hour.
Right.
So does your
I was going to say that the advantage if the state can loosen those requirements and we can get into different spaces, we can be really strategic about where we're putting our programming. So if we know there's a neighborhood that has a lot of need and really struggles with transportation, we can be strategic about that. So again, I'm really counting on the governor right now because I think it would really provide kids an opportunity to be safe and to get this programming that they'll need this year.
What can we do? Another question, what can we do as this group of participants here do to persuade the governor to pass this, or I should say, waive the licensing, and get our stakeholders involved with this?
Yeah, so we're hoping for an executive order. That's the fastest way to make this happen. And like I said, it got sent this morning, I think around 11 a.m. So if you have any connects to the governor's office to make sure that he is looking at this, and I put together some talking points that I can absolutely share. I mean, what it says is kids will not be home alone, kids will be fed, the academics will be stronger, parents can go back to work, and we can stimulate the economy. I mean, I feel like I would have noted that if I was the governor. So I think there's a good shot. If you somebody who get that pushed to the governor's office, governor, if we don't, we'll go to our legislators, like our local senators and whatnot next week. That's plan C. That's next week. Plan A was just to get the department to sign off on it, but we weren't able to do it because all of this is built into law. So we have to change the law.
Yeah, I'm having several private chats to me about our governor and concerns about his this executive order. But please, Aaron, keep us, and Mike, keep this side of the state involved. And another question was your collaborative of after school organizations, your Boys and Girls and your Upper Room and your YMCA, are they all just serving students in charter schools? Are some doing with public schools and some with charters? The 1,000 kids, I guess.
That group covers charter, private, and public on some level. So yeah, we're gonna a little bit of everyone, and even both sides of the state line, which will make things a little complicated for us. But yeah. Yeah,
and the other big organization, Link, has after school programming in the district schools, and so they have state funding, and so their situation's a little different in that they may not need the larger funding request, but we're hoping that we're expecting that the Kansas City School District to come out with a 100% in-person plus virtual option. So this may not be as pressing an issue for the district kids as it will be for the charter schools who have already announced these hybrid models.
Understand. Well, does anyone, I'm looking through here, we got lots of talking. Anyone else have a question or need some information? We can go on. This, we are at 2:55. Aaron, can people, I'm just asking this, can people email you if they have questions after this?
Yeah, on my, yeah,
Whoops.
my email in the chat. Give me.
That would be great if you could put your email in the chat. And Mike and I, is that a candy? What is it called? Mike and Ike, sorry. Mike and Ike.
Yeah.
You can tell it's 3 o'clock. I'm starting to think about candy.
It's an overrated candy, by the way.
No. Mike and I's, no, I keep thinking about candy. Mike's email address is on this last slide, and mine is also. This has been recorded, so we will be sharing. I know, Mike, you'll end this, but we will be sharing this with you to send out to everybody else, plus all of our contact information. Mike, would you like to close it out?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. And Lisa, I just want to thank her also for preparing all these slide template and doing so much great outreach to get people to join these. And Aaron, thank you so much for taking an hour that I know you don't have, as you're so busy trying to plan for these different alternatives. And just in closing, I'll just mention too that we're having one more of these webinars this week for Missouri, which is tomorrow. It looks like Lisa's going to go up to that slide that is focused on the science of reading. And so if you're interested in that, then actually, do you think we could put that registration link in the chat box real quick, Lisa?
Yes, I hope here.
If not, you probably have already received the email with that. So with that, everybody have a great week. And again, feel free to reach out to myself or Aaron from both sides of the state to talk more about planning for out of school time this fall.
Please email me. I apologize, I don't have that link right here, but please email me at lisa.greening@turnthepagesTL.org, and I will give you that link if you would like to join us tomorrow morning at 10 about the science of reading.
All right. Bye, guys. Thank you.